In our journey through the narrative of the whole Bible, we're taking time to sit with the people of Jerusalem who have been defeated and decimated and dispatched to Babylon as exiles. So we're placing ourselves in company with them, and we're facing some very challenging issues. When the world collapses, literally, as in their case, or figuratively for us, what should the people of God do? That's the burden of the book of Lamentations. How do they and we process such heavy grief and loss? Well, we lament. We give expression to the dark grief within us. This book of Lamentations, written by Jeremiah, occurs in the wake of Jerusalem's destruction. And it's this collection of poems which actually doesn't really offer any optimism at all, but no quick fix. But it shows us grief and honesty. The book of Lamentations teaches us that there is a time to mourn and a time to weep, and that we can do this faithfully. We can do this in conversation with God. In a culture that prefers distraction to sorrow or numbing to mourning, this book, it's a gift to anyone who has ever known loss. Lamentations 1, the first poem, opens with this desolate image. How deserted lies the city, Jerusalem, once so full of people. Judah has gone into exile. She finds no resting place. So the city of Jerusalem, once proud and full of life, is now broken and it's empty. And this is the story then, not just of a physical destruction, but a spiritual tragedy. The people are not just grieving the ruins, they're grieving sin and its consequences. Jerusalem has sinned greatly and so has become unclean. Her fall was astounding. And this kind of raw, unfiltered sorrow may feel a little uncomfortable, and we instinctively want it to be resolved. But there is no neat and tidy closure at the end of chapter 1. See, Lord, how distressed I am in torment within. Grief here is unresolved, and sometimes ours is too. But Lamentations models that faith doesn't mean pretending everything's fine. Faith means bringing our anguish to God, maybe over and over. And actually the structure of the book itself reinforces the message. There are 5 poems of lament, and they're marked out by those 5 chapters in our English translations. What's not clear, or it's not so clear in our English translations, is that each poem is an acrostic, kind of an acrostic based on the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So verse 1 begins with A, or Aleph, and verse 2 begins with B, or Bet. Verse 3 begins with C, and so on through the 22 verses of each chapter, using the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. But in the middle section, in chapter 3, there's a triple whammy in the middle through the alphabet. 3 times 22, 66 verses. 3 verses with A's, 3 B's, 3 C's, and so on. Each poem shows this alphabetic pattern like a scaffold to support our grieving. But because all this is very Hebrew poetry, the author hasn't been totally constrained by the framework. There's a few intentional glitches. And actually, as the book progresses, it kind of gets a little loose on that structure, allowing a couple of verses to be out of order. Something like, they've got the G in front of the F and the Q's in front of the M and the N. And so by chapter 4, the structure is really starting to loosen up a bit. And then, when Jeremiah gets to chapter 5, there's still 22 verses, but they don't follow that acrostic framework at all. And it's not as though, that structure became too hard for Jeremiah and he couldn't do it. No, it's the structure in this process of grieving, once so important, it's not such a big deal. So Jeremiah hasn't cheated, wasn't able to finish the crossword. No, he's fully capable of the literary challenge, but there's this intentionality for a reason. We don't need to follow the structure all the way to the end. So why this interesting structure? A decaying structure? Well, scholars argue that it makes most sense in this way. The reason is that these laments, these poems, are meant to be used by the people of the exile. They're meant to be prayed over and over again. And through their repetition, as the mourner works their way through each letter of the alphabet, cycle and again, there is a steady repeating meter as well as an organic development. The grief is being systematically expressed and worked through. You see, grief is a process. It's work to be done. And sometimes working through tragedy in prayer requires repetition and revisiting, telling God over and over again the same thing, working it through, working it out. And eventually and over time that structure does loosen up. As resolution grows, the need for a tight framework to follow is lessened. Having become practiced at lament, the training wheels start to fall away and the pure cry for mercy comes to the fore. Despite the strangeness of this book of Lamentations to us, keeping that process and purpose in mind helps us. We see the structure serves the purpose. Moving on to Lamentations 2, it shows us the pain of God's judgment. This lament, I think it's even more confronting than the first one in chapter 1. It describes God's judgment in deeply personal terms. Verse 1, how the Lord has covered daughter Zion with the cloud of his anger. He has hurled down the splendour of Israel from heaven to earth. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. The Lord is like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has laid waste his own dwelling. He has destroyed his place of meeting. You see, God's temple is gone. His festivals are forgotten. The covenant relationship has been broken. God's justice is real, and in the midst of the disaster that is Israel and Jerusalem, we must recognise God's holiness is not abstract. He does not take sin lightly. Another thing we notice is how the prayers of lament don't try and hide from an objective assessment of Israel's situation. This practice of lament takes on the full weight of the tragedy in company with God. You see, that's the unique stance that the person of faith has in lament. God's not absent from us in our grief. He's fully present to us, even in the dark, even when it hurts, even when we are experiencing the consequences of our own sin. And because God is with us, perhaps unseen and silent, our cry for mercy to him begins to take shape. Verse 18, the hearts of the people cry out to the Lord. You walls of daughter Zion, let your tears flow like a river day and night, and give yourself no relief, your eyes no rest. Arise, cry out in the night as the watches of the night begin. Pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord. See, these prayers of lament do provide a framework or a discipline through which we too can begin naming our pain, confessing our sin and crying for mercy. And if you're reading these laments through in one sitting, they feel relentless, a grind. They're like a mountain to climb. It's especially true when we come to the third lament, chapter 3. It's the centrepiece of the book, 66 verses long, triple the length of the others. And this chapter begins deep in anguish, but it actually ascends up to a singular statement of hope. Listen to how the author, Jeremiah, begins in the depths of chapter 3. I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of the Lord's wrath. He's driven me away and made me walk in darkness rather than light. Indeed, he's turned his hand against me again and again, all day long. He's made my skin and my flesh grow old and has broken my bones. He has besieged me and surrounded me with bitterness and hardship. This is personal. Jeremiah is speaking in the first person as he identifies with the suffering of God's people. And actually in doing so, he teaches us something profound. Lament is not just national or communal, it's deeply individual. Our wounds matter to God. As though climbing a great mountain, verse by verse, chapter 3 develops until there's actually like a breakthrough moment, a shaft of light in the dark. We get to the great turning point in the book of Lamentations in verse 21. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him. It's good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. And this is the heart of the book of Lamentations. In the middle of mourning, Jeremiah recalls the character of God, his covenant love, his steadfast mercy. Even when everything else fails, God remains faithful. He is the grounds for hope. Grief doesn't disappear, but it is reframed by faith. As with the exiles, there may not be an immediate resolution, but there is the deeper hope that God is still present and he is still good. That's why we can pray, and that's why we endure.